It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today we are going to take a look at an interview Donn Davis did with the Sports Business Journal. He did this last week, and it is basically an interview that promotes PFL, but he said some very interesting things during this profile. And we also have another topic or two to bring in. But first, we're going to check in with Boss over here and see how he's been doing.
Oh, fairly good. I am still in Minnesota. Keeping an eye on my mom. It's my turn of all of her children to do that. So I'm out here doing that. And the weather turned. It's no longer 70s up to 80. It is now in the 50s, and it is freaking cold at night.
I love that. Man, I would be so happy. I'm stuck out here in the middle of the desert, it feels like. It's always like 99 degrees out here in the middle of October.
Well, I don't need that either. I just want I want perfect weather. I want my LA Mediterranean weather. That's it.
That's it. All right.
That's it. Don't ask for much. Just perfect weather.
Perfect weather. Well, you know, if you get with the Democrats, you might be able to get them to control the weather for you. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, whoever can control the weather, I think I'm kind of afraid to vote against those people because they have the power to control the weather.
Exactly.
It terrifies me.
All right, so we are going to jump into our show, and the first topic of business today is we had another filing in the UFC antitrust case on Friday. John, what was that?
Well, we had a bunch more declarations filed, 51 declarations, I believe, in total. One was from a manager, the rest from former fighters. So we got now the grand total of 107 declarations asking the judge to please accept the settlement because these fighters really need the money.
You said former fighters, but I happen to see two current ones in there.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that. There is a couple current fighters, and I should go through the whole list. There might be more than two, but we know
I went through it. It's just two.
Oh, it's just two. You went through it for me.
I did.
Ronnie
Yaya.
Ronnie Yaya. I don't know how I forget that name. His name is so memorable. I said space for a moment there. And Yair Rodriguez are the two fighters. Ronnie might be, I don't know if he might be at the end. He might be ready to retire. But Yair is still going. And I know a lot of people said, oh, the UFC is not going to be happy. And I was looking at it and go, I don't know what they're going to be mad about because the UFC also wants the judge to accept the settlement. All he wrote, at least Yair wrote in his declaration is, you know, this would be helpful to fighters. Please accept the settlement, which is the UFC has said the same thing. And so he didn't say anything different than the UFC. He didn't go into any details, which many other fighters went to about CTE and long-term chronic injuries. He didn't really put the UFC on blast like some other fighters did. So I don't think he really has much to worry about because if anybody has a problem to say, I'm just doing the same thing you're doing, trying to get the settlement, the judge to agree to the settlement.
Quick question. Would these declarations possibly help the Johnson case though?
It could possibly, but I don't think they're not going to be as part of the Johnson case. It's a separate period. Mm-hmm. Now, some of the fighters are Johnson fighters, and so eventually they might take these declarations and present them as part, you know, a different group of fighters, let's say part of the Johnson fighter do the same thing and say, we either need a settlement because of all their injuries, or they can present as kind of the wear and tear of the fighters. It's a little hard because the case isn't about damages done to fighters. So, you know, I know a lot of the people who read these declarations think that, and because we focus on the fighters that took the most damage, that what this case is about, or what all these declarations are about the CTE, as though the UFC is solely responsible for the damage these fighters took. That's not what this case is about, and that's not what these declarations are about. In fact, most of the declarations aren't specifically saying the UFC is responsible for my injuries. They're saying because I fought in the UFC and because I did MMA, I have these long-term problems, and that's why I need money from the settlement from damages for the antitrust violations to help me with these other problems. But so in the Johnson case, the heart of the case is not going to be about how physically damaging the sport is, but that is a great way to pull heartstrings. And in both cases, they will, find a way to bring it up a little bit before the jury, I'm sure.
That's what I was going for right there. And not so much that because they're two separate cases. What I mean is, could the Johnson case point to this as a little bit of their evidence or whatever and say, look what we go through and look what we get paid?
Yeah,
so that's what I mean by, could they use that for any reason, not necessarily as evidence to prove a point that's germane to the case itself, but more as you said, tug those heartstrings, make the jury really think about what they're going through and then what they're getting paid.
Yeah, they won't use these declarations because these declarations were approved by these fighters specifically for this reason. So they're not being entered as depositions or something. So they're not being entered in Johnson as evidence for the Johnson case. But they'll do something similar. They'll get, they will get. I think they have depositions of John Fitch or Nate Quarry talking about the Kung Lee and all the other guys that were named plaintiffs that were deposed for the case, that they talked about the damages their body goes through, how hard it is to be a fighter. But again, the case is, as much as that is probably why a lot of our sympathies lie with the fighters, that we see what they go through, especially people that follow the sport closely and cover it like we do, and, follow closely like a lot of our listeners. But the case isn't about, how much damage they suffered. The case is about the damage they suffered economically because of market power and abuse of market, Sherman Act violations. So now one thing I want to bring up too, before we get off this subject, I want to talk about, and as we're getting closer to a possible settlement, I want to put out a warning if you're a fighter listening or fighters, and I don't see this talked about enough, but I think a lot of fighters got to be ready that there will be a lot of, probably already is, a lot of ambulance chasers are going to be coming around looking to get fighters to sign on with them as an attorney. And that doesn't mean, there might be a reason why a fighter would need an outside attorney, because remember, the attorneys that are working on it, they were declared by the court the class representatives. They're the class attorneys. So all the guys, all those firms from Berger, Montague, and Warner, and Rob Macy and Joseph Savary and Eric Kramer, that group, those are the court, or that's the court declared that your class representatives for the fighters. They're the attorneys representing them. Now, if a fighter for whatever reason decided, you know what, I don't like the settlement, I want to opt out, I want to sue the UFC on my own, that makes sense then to get an attorney, right? But in this case, I doubt very many fighters are going to do that. And so what's happening, probably they're getting contacted by they're going to get contacted by attorneys. In fact, I know it's happened before, and I'm sure it's going to continue happening. And I wouldn't be surprised if their management, probably some managers, as we know, not all managers in MMA are above board. Some of them probably want a piece of this. They're probably talking to their fighters as well, saying, hey, maybe we should get an outside attorney because, we can get someone to speed up the process or get you a better deal. Well, unless you go sue by yourself and opt out, they're not going to speed up the process, and they're not going to get you a better deal because the court ordered the ones the court classified as your attorneys, they're the only ones going to move this case forward at the point. So what they're going to try to do if you sign with them is they're going to ask for a fee, a percentage of your winnings. And so what will probably happen if there's a settlement, you will get damages. The team that did the case will take their basically third of the damages. And then from the amount of money the fighter gets, the guy you signed on to represent you, who did nothing but come on at the end, maybe send a letter, he will also get a third. And so you will be down to a much smaller pool of money than you would have had. So I just want to put that out as a warning, because I am sure that there's a lot of these guys. It happened in the NFL case. Attorneys, there's a lot of these, ambulance chasers are going to be coming around looking to get a cut of this. And I'm also positive that more than at least one, a number above zero of managers will be in on this as well. So, because I'm sure they all want their cut as well, thinking they deserve it.
Well, all right. Now we're going to move on and we're going to talk about something that we spoke on last week, but we missed a little tiny bit of information in there. Well, actually, it's actually not a tiny bit of information. It's a significant bit, but it's a 35-page document or 45-page document, and we were hauling ass to get it out fast. So let's talk about what was in that deck proposal that CAA put together for Francis Ngannou. There was some other purses in there. What were they?
Well, yes, it was. Part of the reason we skipped it, it wasn't Ngannou specific information because that's who we were talking to. We had a theme for the show and we stuck with it. But they talked about a few other fighters, UFC fighters, comparison, and they had a comparison between what boxers were making and what UFC fighters were making. And they talked about the at the time in 2022, the pay that Derek Lewis, Kamaru Usman, and Israel Adesanya got. Derek Lewis was, I think, $300,000 a fight at the time. It seems about right. This is right before he signed his new agreement at that year, which I think upped it to close to $1 million. I think that's what he said. So that was his pay. And then they talked about Usman and Adesanya. We have less information. And according to this, and it sounds right compared to what other numbers I've heard independently. It sounds very close to that. Also, with Ngannou and his management and stuff, you think someone there would have some sort of contact with people and have some sort of idea of what these guys were making. So according to this, Usman's base pay was at this time in 2022 was $2.5 million plus pay-per-view points. And so if he fought 3 times a year with this, with a healthy, successful pay-per-view event, he would have made up over $10 million per year if he fought 3 times. But yeah, as we know, almost no UFC fighter except Poatan fights 3 times a year.
You mean
he's champion?
No champion. Yeah.
Yeah. Even non-champions have a hard time getting those fights. There's a select few guys they'll call and get the fights right away. Israel Adesanya, they put his base pay at $3.5 million plus pay-per-view. So he is looking if he can get his 3 fights per year, he is looking at almost $14 million a year. So the very healthy, for UFC, very healthy amounts. Now, the thing you should note, though, is they kind of compare it to what's going on with, boxing, and they make the comparison, and you see that these guys are often making tens of millions of dollars or, on the boxing side. Now, it's not a straight comparison because of the sales difference, but it's noticeable. So if you look through it, we go to that same page, and we should probably at some point just post the whole thing if we can. We posted a bunch of it. I just don't think we pasted this specific page. But anyways, they talk about Deontay Wilder's base pay supposedly was $8 million a fight at this time. His last fight, his one fight the year before, he had an $8 million base pay and supposedly earned up to $20 million with pay-per-view, right? And that's for pay-per-view. And then with Gate, supposedly $35 million for his previous fight. I think that previous fight was against Tyson Fury, right? Same with Tyson Fury. He had a $10 million base pay, $28 million from pay-per-view, and $45 million with Gate. Dillian White for the Fury fight was $8.2 million. And then they had Anthony Joshua, who's got a base pay of $13.5 million, and earned $24.3 million, I guess. I don't know what fight that is, but that actually lines up pretty close with the information we got from his filings in UK Company House. So, this is somewhat, they used all the heavyweights because obviously Ngannou wants to compare himself. They're using this as a comparison. Like, this is the money we're going for as a heavyweight. And he's kind of in this ballpark of these guys, but not the high end of Fury, of course, and not the high end of Anthony Joshua when they get the gates and everything put in, but he surpassed Dillian White. But you look at Adesanya and Usman, who do, especially Adesanya, does sizable numbers. The amount is a fraction of what you'd see in boxing. And I think that's the comparison they wanted to make. Like, you can make money in UFC and MMA, but it's dwarfed by the possibility, not always true, but dwarfed by the possible income that you can make in boxing.
All right. So now we're going to slide right into that Sports Business Journal article that profiled the PFL through an interview with Donn Davis. Now, during the interview, Donn said that the PFL was on track to make 9 figures. Do we believe him?
Well, that's an impressive rate of growth. He says it's more than double. And I mean, I don't want to call him a liar per se, or, let's say an exaggerator, but I don't quite believe it, because I don't think it'd be more than, I think it'd be more than triple, basically. It'd be around triple what they made last year. Not just with PFL and Bellator income last year. I think it would be triple. Because I know Bellator, let's just go through Bellator really quick. Bellator made around 20 million. I think their revenue was about 20 million last year. The year they sold, they were losing just, multiples that as revenue. Now, Bellator a few years before was actually making about 100 million a year. But what happened for Bellator is they lost the DAZN deal that paid, 40 million a year. I can't remember the exact amount. They lost that. They went back to Showtime. Showtime was not paying them a license fee. Showtime would prefer, as the owner of, Viacom, the owner of Bellator, just to report the losses, as a loss, all their expenses for Bellator. So their revenue there dried up greatly. Also, Showtime or Viacom made the decision that a lot of their international deals would be with Viacom properties instead of going out and get the best deal. So Bellator's revenue dried up tremendously over a few years. And I know, I'm pretty sure PFL was making less than Bellator last year. So you're saying that PFL and Bellator together, to get close to 40 million, let's say, Bellator losing a lot of its revenue because they're no longer going to be on, they're losing some of their contracts as they're being acquired by PFL, that they added 60 million in revenue over 1 year. I don't quite believe it. I know they got a new ESPN deal, but I know their ESPN deal did not meet the projections they were hoping for. It was bigger than the last one. It was more than $1 million per card on ESPN, but still that doesn't add up. They don't do live gates. The Bellator live gates have shrunk. Besides the French in France when they went there with PFL, and besides, I guess, Ireland, they do a little bit, and the site fee in Saudi Arabia, they're not a live ticket venue. So you add that up, I sincerely doubt that they're making 100 million. I think they're doing better than they were, but it's a lot like one championship, but a little different in the sense that one championship, because it's public with ACRA, they really finagle and financialize their numbers and kind of do all these barter trades. And I would say when you look at those revenues they generate for one, probably 80% is barter, not real cash transactions, maybe more. They just absurdly inflate their revenue, it looks like. PFL is probably doing something similar. I don't know. It's a private company. They don't have to report anything, so they don't really have to do barter trades. I mean, every company has some barter trades. Like UFC has about 10 million a year in barter trades, which is like 1% of the revenue. Bellator had 1 or 2 million in barter trades, but maybe they do that. Maybe they count the investment as revenue. I kind of doubt that. I think they're just fudging the numbers a little bit on kind of projections. They're definitely doing, better than last year, but I sincerely doubt they're going to make 100 million this year. Let's put it that way. They are, let's say half of that sounds a little, maybe more than, 50 million, 60 million seems plausible, possible, but not 100 million to me.
Now, Donn gave a pretty big valuation of PFL as well. What was that? And do we believe him here? To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Okay, the face!